This story begins with a seemingly lovely man who is clearly hiding something from his wife. He walks in unhappy, having recently returned from his job and very tired. And his wife began to rejoice that her loved one had finally arrived at her home. The girl began to calmly and affectionately ask the guy about how tired he was today. To this question, the husband said that this was the case, from which he was going to go to rest separately in his room. When he walked next to the girl, she immediately realized that this guy was definitely dating that same girl again, because she knew very well that the girl her husband was secretly dating smelled wonderfully of fresh grass. As soon as she realized this, new thoughts began to appear in her head about how best to act. Initially, the lady needed to stop her husband in any case, from which she did so. But the guy started yelling at his wife, telling her that he was too tired, and she continued to bother him. The girl said that she would never believe that her husband was so tired that he was unable to simply listen. The man began to say that he was simply tired of all her words and affectionate addresses, which is why he asked for time to rest. The lady began to understand perfectly well that this person in every possible way did not allow him to inform him that she wanted a divorce. He acted like a bastard who was dating a completely different woman, but at the same time treated his wife so coldly. When Oscar went to his room, Milena immediately followed him, and when the maid did not intend to let her in, the girl simply walked by. There was no hint of emotion on the wife's face, and she was also very determined to communicate her desire. Oscar could not understand what the lady was doing, because she had previously received a refusal to talk and a request to leave her alone. At that very second, Milena unwaveringly uttered the words that she very much wanted to end this marriage and get a divorce. The girl understood perfectly well that she appeared as some kind of forbidden but most delicious fruit, making her own husband sweeter. She also realized that she was the one who could create a strong attachment for her husband to the girl he wanted to be with. Everything said that Milena was from outside this world, thereby simply ending up in this novel suffering from the main character. Unfortunately for Oscar, who is the main character, his main enemy was his own wife, even though the marriage was of convenience. At this time, Milena Cloudwell was the main villain who was simply crazy about her own husband. Despite the fact that in aristocratic marriages different goals and orders are pursued, the girl only wanted to marry Oscar. She also talked to her father about all this, which made him no longer able to talk to her normally. Milena, rejoicing at this behavior of her parent, said that she learned stubbornness from her father. As a result, the father used the very last and quite effective lever of pressure to change his daughter's decision. But before that, the man asked her if Milena was ready to lose her possessions and rights just to marry out of love. If a girl wanted to marry Oscar, disgracing herself, then this would only mean that she could simply be kicked out of the family and deprived of property. Although the Duke of Cloudwell was a member of a collateral branch of the royal family, he had no support, unlike the Marquis, who was a strong authority figure. From the point of view of conditions, there was no need for the Marquis to rush into the wedding, just as there was no reason to cling to Oscar's side. When the girl announced her confidence that she could win the love of her future husband, the father was surprised. With her own decision, she disgraced her own family, after which she simply married the one she wanted. If only the novel had ended in this way, then the girl would have been just a thoughtless character in this book. But unfortunately, Milena was not the main character. She was only the one thanks to whom the love of the real heroes was kindled. She was also just a villain who was a terrible barrier between the love of these people. The relationship between the guy and the girl could not be called normal, since as soon as the marriage took place, Oscar locked Serena in a back alley, also visiting her often. As one might guess, all the people involved in this novel faced a rather unpleasant development of events. The lady believed that in the end Oscar was only her person, since their relationship was bound by marriage. When the girl continued to read the electronic version of the book, she was horrified by the behavior of the main character, because it was wrong. The most surprising thing was that this novel, glorifying the mad love of two traitors, took first place in the rating. But despite all this book was really very interesting, and everyone reading it was delighted with it. The girl thought about who would be pleased to be in the body of the main villain who had nothing. In addition, Milena's personality in the original novel was not entirely ordinary. When Milena found out about the divorce proposal as well as about the existence of Serena, the girl in complete despair decided to harm her. At that moment, Oscar again became an object of regret, also almost losing his beloved, after which he realized that his heart was filled with sadness. This fact was final, after which the author of the novel went on long-term leave for health reasons, as a result of which the story was not completed. Milena did not want to demonstrate her strong obsession with the Oscar, which made her want to walk off into the sunset after the divorce. Since Oscar did not immediately understand his wife's intentions, she repeated the news in front of everyone that she wanted to get a divorce. A little angry, the guy said that he could not understand why the girl came to such a decision. He immediately assumed that Milena simply wanted to attract attention to herself, and besides, her position would not allow her to do this for real. But to this, the girl said that she would no longer upset the guy, and besides, he would be the one paying child support. Suddenly, Oscar began to say that she had become so stupid that she no longer even knew the laws of their own kingdom. However, Milena knew all the laws perfectly in her understanding. It was the guy who was stupid for mistakenly thinking that the law would be on his side. According to the legislation of the kingdom, alimony must be paid by the person who first proposed divorce. That's why the girl just wanted to wait for the moment when Oscar himself proposed a divorce, because she didn't do anything wrong. Milena decided to ask the guy if he knew a woman named Serena, which shocked him. He nervously began to ask his wife how she even knew this name and how long ago it happened. After which Oscar began shouting to the maids to urgently leave his room because it was not for their ears. At the same moment, Milena told Oscar that if he was the first to file for divorce, the girl would not tell anything about her mistress. However, now Oscar was thinking about whether this was really the Milena that he knew earlier, because now there was a completely different behavior. No matter how much Oscar expressed his own disgust for the lady, the girl continued to follow him on his heels. Milena was quite stupid, which is why she constantly groveled in front of the guy in order to achieve at least some kind of affection with her. But then Milena told Oscar that in any case, he would very quickly earn all the money spent on alimony. But it will be difficult to restore your reputation after this whole scandal, even with the help of money. Oscar couldn't even think that his stupid wife could somehow come up with such a thing, which made him very surprised. In fact, before her and Milena's wedding, there were a lot of very bad and unpleasant rumors about the girl. The girl was in a good financial position, but decided to give it all up just to marry Oscar. Only later did many begin to understand why the lady gave up her property for the sake of her own love. However, it will be very bad if people find out about her husband's affair with Serena, who is his mistress. If people knew about this, everyone would start feeling sorry for Milena and also disrespecting the theater owner. He imagined the words of his admirers, where they began to say that the director turned out to be too vulgar. Oscar understood perfectly well that he could not allow this to happen just because he had been working on his reputation for a long time. Now it was impossible to allow Milena to destroy all his efforts because losing it all would be very difficult. Suddenly, the girl asked the now surprised man whether he would need time to think about this situation. When the guy gave a positive answer, the lady began to leave, saying that the given time would give him, but asked not to delay it. Therefore, Milena clarified the amount of time, saying that he would have time until tomorrow morning. Oscar continued to be surprised, since it was very unexpected that Milena herself decided to leave the bedroom. He understood very well that people cannot change in just one night, which is why it was possible that it was just a show. Most likely, this was all just a warning that you just needed to be faithful to the marriage and nothing more. Suddenly, Oscar called out to the girl, as he had a new idea about how this situation could be resolved. The guy admitted to his wife that he didn't even notice what the girl wanted, also admitting that he was indifferent to her. The thought was spinning in my head that the girl was still not as good as Serena, but her face was quite pretty. Usually, Milena always persuaded him to kiss her, but in this situation, Oscar was ready to do it himself. As soon as he was about to do this, the girl pushed the guy away, telling him that it was now unpleasant for her. It seemed that the guy was inventing a lot of things in his head, although this was a huge delusion. Oscar could not understand why the lady was doing this now, because this had never happened before. But with his behavior, the guy simply ruined the girl's whole mood, which made her run out of the room in a rage. After she left the room, the doors simply slammed in her ex-husband's face. Milena began to think about why Oscar needed to kiss her at all, because he had never done this before. The girl also did not understand how it was possible to think of such a thing after the divorce proposal. It seemed to the lady that if Oscar had the opportunity to be with the main character, then everything could go smoothly. It would also never have occurred to her that her husband might try to flatter her in order to get himself into an advantageous position. It was now that it became clear why the real Milena could no longer tolerate such treatment. Now that the grin did not promise the girl any amenities, unlike the original, she will have a lot of problems since now she had nothing. Milena had given up her status on Loey Island in order to get married, but she also could no longer afford to stay in the capital. What was also certain now was that even if she bowed her head to her father, she would definitely be rejected. That is why divorce on Milena's part would be the worst option, since she no longer had the status of a duchess. It should have been like this, but a few days ago, everything turned out completely differently. Milena would never have asked for a divorce if she had no alternative. The girl was lucky that quite recently she remembered one thing, because in the original, almost nothing was mentioned about it. Previously, it could not even have occurred to her that a girl could have connections so valuable to her that they could solve the whole situation. Count Balthus was a distant relative of the lady his family was known for its shortivity due to poor health. He also had no children as well as nephews, but after whom, as his death was announced, Milena was quietly contacted. Since the girl was invited before, however, Milena from the novel would never have gone to her relatives. But now, the girl was going to leave for a few days, so that everyone would think that it was in order to make her ex jealous. Milena thought that even though Oscar was her husband, he was still much worse than the others. The lady also remembered that she was only a distant relative of the Count, but despite this, he treated the girl friendly. Milena often came to chat with him and also often read books to him, since his eyes were clouded. She also heard the Count say that he knew very well what most people did not understand the lady. The Count knew very well that inside Milena was a sweet child, to whom he was very happy. The lady also had one brother, but their mothers were different. He was now attending the successor's lessons to take the place of the head of the house. Thus, the girl was the only relative among the Count's 6 family lines to whom he could turn. He didn't think that he might regret simply handing over his own title to her. When Milena was privy to the fact that she would become the Count's sole heir, she simply beamed. The will and letter left by the Count were sent after his death a few days later. The moment all these documents reach the department for official consideration, Milena will become a rich aristocrat. If Oscar finds out about a lady's property, he will never ask the girl for a divorce, because it will be unprofitable for him. So it was precisely because of this that the girl was going to not tell anyone about it at first. As soon as the divorce process is completed, the girl will immediately enter into the inheritance of her relative. In the worst case, the lady herself would have to ask Oscar for a divorce and then pay alimony. Milena recalled that for the most part she did not need the inheritance. She would have been glad if the Count lived a little longer. He was her first real and rather close friend in this world, but he left too early. No matter how hard it was, the girl was going to live for her own pleasure and not regret anything. The lady also remembered very well that her uncle asked her not to be too sad, which she did not intend to do. Now she needed to create a situation so that Oscar himself would demand a divorce without causing unnecessary suspicion. It was necessary to deal a crushing blow to her ex-husband, because she had to act now. If everything went smoothly, then Milena's concocted plan should definitely have worked. She wanted to give her husband such a sweet life that the guy would have no choice but to divorce. After some time, Oscar and Milena met at dinner, which was appointed by the husband himself. Of the servants, only one butler was left. Most likely this was so that the lady would not talk about Serena. Suddenly, the man told her that he simply wanted to improve their entire married life, which surprised the lady. Oscar began to admit that up to this point he had not been a very good husband, but he still did not understand why the divorce was demanded. It was because of this that he now intended to spend as much time as possible with his wife and also improve their relationship. Milena thought that if she were a real heroine, she would most likely just shed tears. But since the guy was very wrong, the girl was going to take this chance to get a divorce. That's why Milena was going to give it her all during dinner lately. Now, all that remained was to follow the invented plan and start your own performance. And Oscar began to encourage his wife, telling her that her dream all the time was only a happy married life. To this, the girl told her husband that his outcome of events was only possible in the case when you did not know about the existence of his mistress. However, she did not know what Oscar was even thinking about when he decided to tell her all this, but there were assumptions. If a man wanted to have an affair, he should first make sure that no one would find out. When Oscar heard these words, he was shocked again. After all, for him all this was extremely unexpected and quite unpleasant. At that very second, the husband began to shout at his wife because this whole situation was already driving him crazy. When this happened, Milena began to think that he should have turned up the heat a little to get the desired result. Suddenly the lady said that Oscar achieved all this himself, and now he is also trying to restore all the trust in the marriage. The man began to talk about his wife immediately apologizing to him. Otherwise, she would regret what she said. But she stood her ground and said that journalists would soon come to this place to conduct an interview. Even if Oscar ran right now to save and hide his mistress at the address, he clearly would not be able to silence the others. That is why it was worth thinking about the fact that at the moment, he would have to apologize in order to save everything. And due to the fact that the guy did not intend to do this, the lady told him not to further regret what he had done. At that moment, Oscar jumped up and started shouting that he was ready to file for divorce himself, since she wanted it so badly. Since Lady Milena had previously said that her husband would regret something, he immediately began to throw arrows at her. But to this, the girl calmly asked him about what she could possibly regret. Suddenly, the ex-husband announced that even if she received alimony, in any case, she would not be able to spend it in the capital. Since the girl would have no name or status left, all the aristocrats would look down on her. And there was not a single place in the kingdom that Oscar could not reach, be it the palace or the southernmost gate. Milena realized that the man's action was extremely expected and predictable, which is why she decided to play. After all, in her past life, the girl was a skilled actor and played significant roles in the theater. Acting in her life was what she and everyone around her did best. Due to the fact that the girl specialized in improvisation in the theater, it will not be difficult for her to act out an obsession with her husband. Immediately, the girl began to pretend to be more confused, so as not to seem too smart. Suddenly, Oscar told her that at the moment, she herself had closed all the paths to their peaceful conversation about the relationship. Milena understood that she had to force Oscar to control the situation so that he would be more confident and start talking about divorce. After which, the whole conversation between the guy and the girl flowed in the right direction for the lady. Oscar began to demand further divorce. Once everything is done, the man will no longer have any reason to be polite to his ex-wife. At that moment, the girl realized that she could no longer continue to play normally. Real feelings of anger began to take over her, but she decided that she needed to endure a little longer to squeeze out the last juices, which is why she cried in front of the guy. However, Oscar responded to this by telling the girl to stop doing this, because now it annoyed him even more. After some time, the man was in his office, thinking about why the girl gave the correct address of his mistress. If in the future he began to hide the girl more carefully, then nothing terrible would happen anymore. And Milena needs to be more discerning when proposing a divorce, having also first thought about whether she has anything to lose. Yesterday, Oscar was scared in vain because the girl couldn't do anything at all, which made her behavior absurd. After this, the guy called his butler and asked him about how the girl behaved after he left. The butler told the gentleman that the girl began to sob so much that she began to beg to talk again. Suddenly, Oscar said that the girl had gone so far not knowing her place that upon her return she found it. Now the guy was sure that he must divorce this lady, as she wanted. Oscar had up to this point allowed the lady to be at his feet, but when she decided to stand up, that came to an end. From now on, the man was ready to send his ex-wife to the very bottom of the quagmire so that her life would turn into hell. The Cloudwell Grand Theater held performances every day and was sold out due to its convenient location. It would also not be an exaggeration to report that the great dream of most young people who come to the capital is to get here. Before the lady moved into Milena's body, her specialty was acting, especially dramatic productions. Earlier, the girl boldly told Oscar that she would like to be an actress, but was immediately refused, since in his opinion she could not do anything. Now Milena began to wonder whether there was any point in continuing to think about her old past in the theater. But there was a thought in my head that after the divorce, I would definitely have to go study acting. At the same moment, the girl met with an assistant, who began to ask if something had happened to her. Milena immediately wondered if it was natural for a wife to come to her husband's work. Looking at the employee, Milena realized that this man was already sweating from fear. It seemed as if he was afraid of trouble. The lady understood perfectly well that from now on Oscar was only unpleasant for her, but for now she would just have to put up with it. Now it was time to raise the curtain for the very beginning of her play, from which the girl began to play her role. When she said that the director himself called her to the office, The employee could not believe it. Milena understood perfectly well that at the moment, she needed to look nervous and slightly confused. At the same moment, another young man appeared behind the guy and immediately ran up to them. He exclaimed that they were already waiting for the girl, from which he said that he was ready to take her straight to the director. Milena realized that Oscar's deputy appeared at the most opportune moment. Otherwise, the whole plan would have failed. As soon as the girl was in her husband's office, he immediately pointed out to her that she had appeared without gloves, thereby losing her own dignity. At this point, the lady began to make excuses and say that she simply did not have time to put on gloves. After that, Milena noticed that on the table were already filled out documents for the divorce that she wanted so badly. Now all she has to do is sign them, and then what she wants will be achieved in an instant. At this point, the lady began to try to stop everything, but Oscar stood his ground and told her to just sign the document. The man also hinted to her that earlier she herself had created this whole situation, and now she also wanted to stop everything. At this time, the girl was thinking about how much she wanted to roll her eyes, but now she shouldn't do that. As she signed all the papers, the thought was spinning in her head that the whole plan had almost come to an end. Suddenly, the girl told Oscar that at the moment she still had time during which she could convince him. But the man immediately said that he was not going to give her a period to think, which would make the divorce go away quickly. Milena immediately realized that everything was going exactly according to plan, but now was not the time to relax. The lady looked sad and asked her husband if additional expenses would be needed so that the case would be considered faster. To this, the director said that money was not a problem for him, unlike the girl herself, who was left without everything. That is why he personally was ready to pay all these additional expenses just to get rid of his wife as quickly as possible. As soon as the ex-wife heard this, a certain gratitude appeared in her head that thanks to this, she would be able to save money. Oscar handed over the documents and told the assistant to go and give them right away, after which he immediately returned here. The deputy immediately became confused, since he perfectly understood that if he left now, he would not have time to get to the department. Oscar started screaming at him to either run or use the carriage, but he had to deliver these documents right now. Milena didn't understand how Oscar could treat his deputy like that, because he wasn't even his secretary. She also assumed that no one would ever have guessed that this man had such a terrible side to his character. At this point, Oscar also asked the lady if she thought that his assistants could somehow help her in this situation. As soon as the deputy left, the man told his ex that within 3 days they would be completely divorced. During this time, she should have enjoyed the title of Duchess, because after this time, he would have deprived her of all this. But in this case, Milena was ready to end this whole show, first making a villain out of Oscar. Suddenly, the girl began to cry, also screaming that the guy would definitely regret what he had done. As the lady ran out of her husband's room, she began to think about whether showing a tearful look was enough. But in fact, she did not have time to cry, because from that moment on, she had a lot to do. Since Oscar himself advised the lady to enjoy the title of Duchess, that is why she began to think about where she could take a walk. I came up with the idea of submitting an application to the bank to rent a safe deposit box for storing inherited property in the near future. In addition, Milena could still use the Duke's name to her advantage, which would make the latter idea the best. As soon as she arrived at the bank, she asked to rent a safe deposit box for a week to store her things. She also asked to be recorded not as a duchess, but simply as Milena, no matter how strange it may be. She also did not need to provide additional services, because she just needed to rent a cell for a week. But suddenly the girl said that she also wanted to take out a loan in her husband's name. She also added that she wanted to get approval for this loan within an hour. But since the girl was a duchess, there was a special option for her, from which the loan could be approved immediately. As soon as she learned this, she began to like being an aristocrat more and more, because such a loan could only be obtained with high status. She immediately asked for a loan for the maximum amount, and besides, the interest rate on it would be quite high. Milena wanted to squeeze all the juice out of Oscar and then simply run away, because even he gave her the opportunity to enjoy status. At that moment, the employee called the girl over, as he had to take her to the locker in the storage room. As soon as they walked to the vault, the man told the girl that this was a vault with first-class security, and also intended only for the aristocracy. Only she would know the password for the cell, so she should have chosen it as best as possible and slowly. The employee said that he would turn his back on her, from which she could calmly introduce her defense without fear of anything. Milena understood that now her most valuable thing was her will, which had to be hidden until the very end. Milena decided to add her own jewelry to the will so that the box would not stand out too much inside. The girl understood that her uncle's will was now officially under the protection of the Royal Central Bank. After a couple of minutes, the lady reported that she had done everything she wanted, which is why it was already possible to go back. She had previously been briefed on how to use the safe, and all the contents could have been destroyed if she had not come to claim it. Milena was ready to take care of taking everything before the storage time expired, so as not to regret it later. Now the girl was sure that she had taken care of all the plan that she had come up with, which is why all the horror would soon end. Since the divorce will be finalized in 3 days, a week of storing the cell will be quite enough. When the girl left the locker, she was informed that the loan had been successfully processed, from which she personally received 50 million acre. Milena, when she took her money, simply thanked the employee and said that they all did a great job. As soon as Milena began to leave the bank, everyone present inside began to see her off. 3 days later, she needed to go to the department and find out whether the whole divorce issue had been resolved. After all this, she will need to get a will and enter into an inheritance, after which the entire mansion in the capital will be hers. Although the capital's mansion has been empty for a long time, at least this way she will be able to afford her own house in the capital, and the money she took on credit will have to go towards her own living expenses for some time. Today, Milena felt so excited for the first time since she found herself in this girl's body. But even despite this, from now on, the lady could finally live like a human being after divorcing this scum. Despite the fact that she was the mistress of the duchy, she was still allocated a certain budget, which is why she had to save a lot. She did this only because everyone had to admire her, since she was a duchess, but Oscar was not delighted. However, even despite this, the girl loved Oscar and endured all this, never saying that she did not like all this. Milena just longed for the love of her husband, who did not care deeply about her and her feelings. Since the girl tried to earn money herself, her husband gave her huge lectures about this, because it was stupid for her. Her behavior could show outsiders that her husband was not competent enough, since the woman began to earn money herself. Oscar didn't like the fact that she had disgraced him in this way, which made his nerves become less and less strong. Now she understood perfectly well that their divorce was now a relief for both of them, and nothing like that would happen again. Oscar constantly ignored her, but now she could compare with him and show all her abilities. At this time, the man was thinking about where his Serena's new home would be located so that no one would know about her. But at that moment, the phone rang, which only made him more irritated. When he picked up the phone, he realized that Lowell, who mostly called only about banking matters, was trying to call him. At that moment, Oscar learned that Milena had taken out a huge loan in the name of her husband. As soon as he heard this, he immediately became furious, because the husband and wife were almost divorced. He started shouting about how the employee dared to give such a loan without the consent of the person in whose name they were going to take such a sum. The guy was also told not to worry too much, because at the moment he did not have any problems with the bank. Even though he knew this, Oscar couldn't understand how someone could be approved for a loan in someone else's name. But at that moment, the employee said that the loan was approved because Milena also had the man's last name. This fact worked not only with banking, but with all the laws of the kingdom. However, the man stood his ground and said that he should have been at least somehow notified about this and asked for permission. But the check was not carried out only because Milena asked for an immediate loan, and the amount was not very large. When he found out the loan amount, the man began to think that his ex-wife had counted all her moves before taking action. Oscar understood perfectly well that the employee was right that the amount of 50 million was not too much. The guy could easily cover this entire amount with just one contribution, but something else was spinning in his head. After some time, Oscar began to worry more and more about what his ex-wife had done, because previously, he could not even imagine that the girl could take out a loan. Suddenly, he started yelling at the employee for practically not protecting his clients, which might stop people from coming to him anymore. But at that moment, Oscar was told that his attempts to block Milena's access to the family deposit account were completely abnormal. Since the guy was the first to ask for it, it was quite difficult to settle the whole matter without damaging his image, which now required him to act calmly. However, the director could not understand why his friend said this. He understood perfectly well that it could be connected with his work. but the Duchy of Cloudwell also had a rich history of its own, associated with royal blood. It turned out that Oscar's grandfather, who was the first duke of the family, was one of the brothers of the late king. Although this family was the most noble in the kingdom, the previous king was always afraid of it, because he did not want to lead all this to political strife. Previously, he prevented the family from somehow getting close to the kings, but the family still managed to create an excellent life for themselves and start their own business. But since Oscar could not take a single step towards politics, the man had to work in their theater, which is why many people simply ignored him. Suddenly, Lowell said that they needed to end this conversation, since even now he was doing something he shouldn't have. He also told his friend to calm down and just drink water to cool down, since the amount was small. Now Oscar understood that losing a person like Lowell would be very bad, which made him realize what he had done. He was well aware that because of his own anger at his wife, he became extremely angry. Milena just sat and with a smile on her face, thought about how angry her ex could be after receiving the information. After all, he also wouldn't be able to do anything to her, which would make him simply angry, and then calm down and forget. She also understood that she could now afford something that she couldn't previously, which is why her mood began to rise even more. After which the girl called a carriage of the highest class, also informing where she would need to be taken. She was also asked whether it was possible to deliver the girl by a shorter route, since recently many people were reluctant to travel along side streets. Recently, a criminal group appeared. It was also already notorious for its actions. But the lady could not think that such a gang could be present in such a remote place. She also understood that most likely the hooligans would not even touch the aristocrat's carriage. It also had a simple communication device that connected directly to the city's guards, making everything safer. That is why at the moment you could just relax and enjoy the trip. Milena noticed that she was currently driving along the street where her ex-husband's mistress lived. The lady understood that this girl was the main character, and most likely was beautiful. Otherwise, she would not have been with Oscar. Nevertheless, the girl was annoyed by the misunderstanding with the Oscar, which is why she now needed to stay away from Serena. At the same moment, she noticed that a man was walking down the street, whose face did not look at all appropriate in this place. Despite his shabby appearance, the guy was carrying a first-class wallet in his hands, which was most likely full of money. In addition, he had a real sword hanging from his belt, which further confused his position. Milena immediately began to assume that this man could simply steal this wallet from someone, which should have been reported. At the same moment, she noticed that he was heading towards his group, which was already holding some guy who was most likely going to be beaten. Suddenly, the lady shouted to the coachman to stop the carriage immediately, as it was necessary to inform the guards about everything. After that, Milena started calling the city to tell her about the fight, even though she shouldn't care. But she also couldn't allow someone to be attacked in front of her eyes, which is why she was going to tell everything. As soon as the lady ended the call, she realized that the guards would arrive here very soon since she was still an aristocrat. But before the guards arrived, it still took at least 5 minutes, during which a lot could happen. Milena looked out of Karen's window, whispering that the guy should hold on until the last, so as not to get seriously hurt. At that same second, she realized that the poor man began to stagger, also realizing that most likely she did not have time. However, something completely different happened. The guy whom everyone was attacking harshly dealt with his own offenders. When she realized this, she was shocked, because it was impossible to believe in it so easily. But she also had to tell the guy in any case that she was only there to help him. However, because of fear, the girl could not even move. She could not say a single word. As soon as he fell to his knees, Milena noticed the color of the guy's eyes, which also made her horrified. The poor fellow whispered that no one would ever catch him, otherwise he would feel very bad. Tears flowed from his eyes. The guy asked the lady to save him and help him in some way. He also began tearfully muttering that if he was caught, all his plans would come to an end. After a couple of seconds, he fell at Milena's feet, who was even more shocked and no longer knew what to do next. The indignant thought that who else should have saved who after what happened immediately came into my head. Soon the guards arrived and began interrogating the lady about what actually happened here, also making assumptions. Milena said that all this happened after she was returning from the bank, and after that she met this crowd. The guard was quite surprised, since he knew very well that robbers generally do not attack such expensive carts, because of which the girl had no choice but to start saving her own skin with a dictionary attack. The security immediately began to apologize and also explain in more detail their point of view, which was completely different from Melena's assumptions. The lady also began to assume, together with the guy, that this gang was on something, because they behaved extremely inappropriately. She asked the guard for a list of wanted people, which made him hesitate a little. But without thinking for a long time, he handed over this list and said that he would tell everyone to strengthen security on the streets. The lady gave the sheet and said that she did not know any of these people, after which she was about to leave. However, at that moment she was informed that she would have to go for interrogation, since only Melena was a witness. Suddenly, she began to be indignant that after voluntarily reporting the situation, they were going to interrogate her about something. As soon as the girl announced that she would come to the guard post the next morning, the guard began to admire her. The lady understood perfectly well that if someone else had offered this, he would have simply been refused. But the girl's status took its toll. A couple of minutes later, the coachman asked Melena if she was really confident in her actions, from which the girl immediately reminded him that his company's policy did not allow anyone to disclose information about clients. Since the coachman also needed to testify, the lady simply tipped him a little so that he would do everything right. But then the guy started talking about this lady's false statement, and that he was quite worried. However, as soon as he understood the amount required by the girl, the coachman agreed and announced that he had to take the lady to her resting place. Madame decided to take the guy on whom others had attempted to kill with her, although she understood that it would be difficult to get him to the hotel. Without thinking for a long time, the girl told the coachman that first she had to drive through government streets. In the carriage, Melena tied the hands and feet of the victim, hoping that he would not be able to immediately run away from her. He also did not have any things that could identify his status. The lady understood that there was a possibility that he had some other weapons, but she hoped that this was just a guess. What was unexpected was that the young man's cheekbones and muscles turned out to be many times stronger than they were at first glance. Thoughts began to arise in my head that this guy was a truly unusual person. Melena immediately noticed that his clothes, although dirty and smelly, were clearly not cheap and well-made. In addition to this, luxurious embroidery was visible on the sleeve of the garment, but it was not clear what it was for. It was also obvious that this person was clearly from a noble and wealthy family. But given the girl's position in society and the capital, she could not know him after all. She was just a duchess. And if the son of an influential aristocrat disappeared, then leaflets about the loss would be in all corners. Suddenly she remembered that most aristocrats had to have their familiar crest engraved on their swords, after which the girl checked the sword, which actually had something forged on it, but she did not understand what it was. Melena was also aware that she still didn't really understand anything, which made her quite uncomfortable. The girl decided to check the victim's wallet and found a notebook with bottles of medicine there. This indicated that the man was quite rich, and besides, there were no workshops in the capital where such a design of jars could be made. When Melena opened the notebook, she was shocked it was written in it that the boy should always take his medicine. The lady immediately assumed that the victim had taken his medicine, which is why he wandered the streets in delirium. The girl also suggested that he simply had no choice not to take this drug. At that very second, she realized that she had picked up a noble lord whose life was definitely in danger. In the evening, Serena went out into the street, not understanding what kind of noise had been happening there some time earlier. Suddenly, her gaze fell on the ground, on which she saw a very beautiful medallion, also deciding to pick it up. She understood perfectly well that at the moment there was no one on the street, and besides, the owner himself did not come for him. The girl headed into the house, thinking that she would try it on there, otherwise her man might find out that she went outside. Serena sat down on the bed and thought that her beloved had not visited her for a long time. The thought was spinning in her head about when the Duke could come to her again and spend some time together. At this time, Oscar was informed that they fully understood his situation, but the loan was taken out before the divorce was confirmed. Because of this, Melena had every right to take out a loan in the name of the family, and this would not be illegal. In addition, at the moment it was desirable for Oscar to repay the debt as early as possible in order to minimize his losses. But the thought was spinning in his head that he couldn't lash out at the branch manager right now. As soon as the director hung up, he began to think that Melena had already completely lost her mind. He had previously heard that the girl left the mansion with only the contents of her safe, from which she probably took the loan. Since she hated her husband, deciding to take out a loan in her husband's name would be the best thing for her. Oscar became increasingly irritated. He was going to simply kill the lady if she did not come to him with an apology. But at that moment, someone called the guy again, which forced him to calm down and pick up the phone again. At that very second, he heard a voice from which he was horrified. It turned out that they wanted to know from the director whether he had found the Archduke's nephew. It turned out that this guy was the head of the Red Ravens, who simply disappeared some time ago. Oscar immediately began to apologize and talk about how he had not yet found this person, also apologizing. As soon as the mentor said that this matter could not be postponed, the director said that now he would no longer disappoint him with anything. It was also a great honor for the guy that the man decided to contact him directly. If Oscar had done his assigned job well, he would have also received enormous fame. He understood perfectly well what this could give him because the greater the glory, the better for the duchy. Thanks to this assignment, Oscar would be able to get into the very center of political actions and decisions. Adam was a mysterious man, and he was also the leader, and it was he who entrusted Oscar with the task of finding his nephew. The fugitive was the son of a former archduke. His name was Ludwig Rawhide, who was soon to gain the throne. Previously, there was a theory that it was he who wanted to get his father's place, which is why he killed him and then ran away. The guy was a terrible killer, but it would be very difficult to launch a public investigation without evidence. Oscar understood perfectly well that there were gaps in Adam's explanation that were quite noticeable. Well, in the end, Rudolph was the only person who won in the current situation. If the director had caught the criminal and turned him in, the Archduke would have owed him a huge debt. As Adam said, as soon as Oscar makes his way into politics and makes a major contribution to the development of the country, he would be a force to be reckoned with. And after that, we could try to remove the crown prince with the help of Red Crows. And in this case, the guy's dream of ascending the throne will no longer seem as unrealizable as it seemed now. Oscar understood that there would be very few mercenaries alone, which is why he was going to hire journalists as well. The director repeated his nephew's appearance. Since it was quite remarkable, he could easily distinguish and recognize him. The mission given to Oscar may have been a one-of-a-kind opportunity for him, which is why he had to take advantage of it. He was ready to do this even if he had to use the leading actress of the theater. At that same second, the man called his deputy, telling him to clear the girl's schedule for tomorrow. It was also necessary to contact journalists to arrange a meeting with them as well as discuss all the details. While Oscar was thinking about what else he needed to do, the image of Malena appeared in his head again, which made him irritated again. The man also said that he absolutely had to communicate with one woman who needed to be warned about this. The deputy immediately understood who should have been warned, and then said that he would do everything right away. At this time, Malena was thinking about what she should do now with the selected lord and how to treat him later. I immediately remembered that you shouldn't pick up street animals if you weren't sure that you could raise them. However, Malena couldn't just leave the guy when he looked so pitiful. Well, if not for certain circumstances, then most likely the girl would have simply left the guy with her and not thought about anything. Because she was a duchess who was still divorced, she couldn't do anything with him. And once she inherited the title, she wouldn't have time. The question again arose in my head about what should now be done with the selected guy. Looking at his face, Malena dared to assume that the Lord had gone through a difficult path. Suddenly, she decided that she would be ready to take care of the guy until tomorrow, but no longer. After all, there was also nothing wrong with her taking care of someone for a day, and besides, after that, he would come to his senses. Malena decided which hotel she was going to go to, so she told the coachman the address. In the morning, the Lord woke up in a room unknown to him, from which he immediately began to wonder what happened and where he was. After looking around a little and finally waking up, he realized that he had to urgently leave this place. When the guy saw his reflection in the mirror, he did not immediately understand what kind of person stood in front of him. The Lord was well aware that this was definitely his reflection, but he remembered himself as completely different. As soon as he began to remember where he was going to go and what goal he had been holding for so long, his head began to pound. The last memories of what happened earlier also began to arise. He, the Lord, remembered his escape very well. After that, he remembered a woman with red hair, but he already remembered her only in fragments. Before he lost consciousness, he clearly remembered her attractive gaze and charming appearance. But the flow of memories was stopped by Malena, who asked if the young man had woken up, which is why he immediately tensed. When the Lord turned around, he saw in front of him exactly the woman who was in his head. Suddenly, Milena asked him why he attacked her at all if she was his savior. But after that, she reported that she came into the room only because she heard a rather loud and sharp noise coming from it. The lady asked him how he felt, because his appearance indicated that he was clearly not feeling very well. At the same moment, Milena asked the Lord if his throat hurt after everything that had happened. Then she offered him to drink water, also saying that it was an ordinary liquid. When she held out the mug, the guy was going to take it and also thank the Savior for her help. While he drank the water, the thought was spinning in his head that this woman was clearly not a bad person. He also recalled why he dealt with those guys, after which he settled on the possibility that they could be working for the enemy. However, after he realized how badly the guys fought, they clearly weren't working for him. The Lord only remembered that his enemy was tirelessly hunting down the target, which is why he had to defend himself from everyone. Due to too much thought, the guy again felt severe pain in his head. At that moment, Milena asked him to just calm down and not think about anything, so that it would become easier. Also, earlier it was he who asked the girl to save him, from which she simply fulfilled the request and wanted to complete it completely. But there was another reason why Milena saved the Lord. It seemed to her that if she didn't take him, he would simply die. Having heard this option, the guy realized that most likely this woman was a very good person. At that moment, the girl decided to move away to give something away, which is why the poor guy simply decided to obediently wait for her. After some time, the lady brought things into the room that she had temporarily taken from the guy, also asking him if he remembered them. Since she was curious about the person's identity, she allowed herself to rummage around a little, for which she apologized. She talked about finding an engraved design on the sword, also trying to find out if the Lord remembered it. The guy simply took the sword, hugging it, and Milena continued to question him only about the wallet. Suddenly, the poor fellow spoke up and said that he did not remember all of these things, after which he decided to tell everything that he remembered. After Milena listened to the Lord, she realized that the guy remembered almost nothing recently. At this moment, the guy looked pitifully at his savior, which made the girl a little surprised. Suddenly, tears flowed from the Lord's eyes. He began to apologize and say that he didn't remember anything at all. This made the lady even more surprised. She could not understand why this poor fellow began to cry. The girl began to calm him down so that he would not begin to force himself to remember something even more strongly. Besides, he had absolutely nothing to apologize for, and because of his reaction, it began to seem that the girl had done something wrong. This guy's identity would later be confirmed thanks to his sword, making him something to keep an eye on and not lose. Milena told the Lord that he still needed to hide since he could still be wanted. After the lady informed the poor man about everything, she got ready to leave his room because now she didn't need anything. At that moment, the guy stopped her and thanked her for helping him with everything. Hearing this, Milena was a little surprised because previously only Oscar stood in front of her, who treated her badly, but now something new happened. The lady simply smiled at the poor guy and asked him to just take care of himself and mind his own business. The next morning, the girl asked the Lord if he slept well, to which she received a positive answer. Milena said that she was glad that that day he finally heard a knock on the door and did not have to enter the room without asking. At that moment, she noticed a bag of things under the poor man's foot, which is why she immediately asked him where he was going. The girl also said that although she is leaving here, he can stay further since they cannot go together. It turned out that now Milena only came in to find out if the guy was okay, so that she could then leave here with peace of mind. As she looked into the Lord's eyes, she began to feel more and more guilty for not warning earlier. The girl also understood that he was in a difficult situation, which is why she hoped that he would be able to return to his previous place without seriousness. Suddenly, she handed him a small stack of money, saying that this could be enough for him for a while. The girl also paid for the Lord's accommodation for several days in advance, which is why he had nothing to worry about now. As soon as the poor guy asked if he could go with the girl, she said that now she was in no position to hide someone. After he heard the reason, he apologized for his persistence and for disturbing her. At that moment, Milena realized that she would leave here only after she had settled everything with this person. She wished the guy good luck and asked him to listen to the advice she gave yesterday, because now he should have rest. As soon as the girl went down to the first floor, she was told that a carriage had already been called, from which she needed to leave. While Milena was leaving, she asked the man to take care of the young man in the room. As the lady approached the transport, She wondered whether everything would be fine with the poor guy after this. However, she could not understand how the Lord could trust a person whom he had known only for a day. Now the girl understood that she had come to feel that she had simply abandoned some child, which is why she began to try to come to her senses. As soon as the lady set off, she began to think that at the moment she needed to focus on her business. When the coachman and Milena completed their journey, after some time, they were informed that the entire investigation had been completed. The lady then asked the man if he knew what to do to stay safe. Right now, she was happy that it had ended so easily just because of all the notoriety she got from the original. But now the girl could take care of her uncle's mansion in the capital, since she had completed the previous problems. At the same moment, Milena saw the poor fellow wandering, which is why she was surprised, while the guy immediately began to apologize. After a couple of minutes, the lady began to question him about why he followed her in the first place. It turned out that the guy heard through the window the lady calling her own destination, which is why he came here. Milena was immediately surprised by this. It seemed very strange to her that he recklessly followed her on foot. At that same moment, she learned that most likely he was moving completely unaware of what he was doing. However, she did not understand why he was doing all this, which led her to assume that it was due to memory loss. It was as if this poor guy thought that he could only hold on to her since she was kind to him. Suddenly, the lady told him not to worry so much again, because everything was in perfect order, but he should return to his previous place. It turned out that he also wanted to return the day he received from Milena back to her, which shocked her. At that moment, a familiar voice came from behind, saying that the girl was throwing money away again. When Milena turned around, she saw her ex-husband in front of her, who was able to find her. Immediately, the girl thought about how he knew the place to which she was heading earlier. Oscar told the lady that the smile had disappeared from her face after the divorce, while the girl was thinking that she simply didn't have to play the fool anymore. The director began to say that if she wastes all her money, then her future life will be difficult. But then Milena also attacked, because her ex-husband continued to pursue her during the divorce, which gave him a bad name. Oscar continued to stand his ground and said that he should have just rid his ex of bad habits like hers. The girl said that if this amount was so important to him, then he could simply subtract it from the amount of alimony, which he would then pay. Milena also began to think about why her ex was so persistent that day. When the girl began to remind the man about Serena, he immediately began to get even angrier, but decided to ask again. She also understood that in the center of a busy city, where there are many guards, Oscar would never do anything to a girl. As soon as the man took the lady's hand, she said that she would start screaming if he continued to behave this way. At the same moment, Oscar informed his ex that she would compensate for all the losses that the man suffered due to the loan. Suddenly, Milena realized that the contents of her cell would very soon be destroyed, which is why she did not have time for a man. While Oscar was leading her, she tried to think more actively about how to get out of the whole situation. Besides, now she didn't have time to just be late because otherwise her life would simply be over. At that moment, the Lord stopped Oscar and began to say that this girl did not like his actions very much. He also decided to ask him about why he did this in the first place and what his goals were for the lady. The director began to ask the Lord what he was doing and why he stopped them, after which he asked that this tramp simply mind his own business, since the aristocrats themselves would figure everything out. However, the guy stood his ground and was not going to let his savior go with the man. At that moment, Oscar began to threaten the young man because he did not even know who he was now standing in front of. Milena began to assume that the person she had chosen was most likely an aristocrat because he did not even instinctively bow to Oscar. Suddenly, the lady began to think that now, in any case, she needed to somehow protect the poor fellow. At the same moment, the lady told Oscar that this young man was her bodyguard. In any case, the guy would not have had problems with this, since there was nothing terrible or bad about the fact that the guards were protecting the aristocrat. Oscar, at that moment, was quite surprised by the words of his ex, but he understood what should be said. He began to question the lady about why her bodyguard then behaved completely inappropriately with the director. Suddenly, she suggested that Oscar simply go to the guards to determine that his rights were actually violated, but the director understood perfectly well that he had many reasons to come to the lady, and the most important thing was because of the loan. But at that moment, Milena told Oscar that this problem arose only because he had taken a mistress. The girl realized that now everything was fine with her, which happened mostly thanks to the guy she found. At the same moment, She noticed that this guy was blushing very hard, from which she assumed that this happened because of her words. The lady at the same moment asked Oscar to leave this place, or at least stop blocking her path. Moreover, in any case, he was wrong since he tried to drag the girl by force to him for some unknown reason. But if he wants to take the lady again, then nothing would work out for him until this friend leaves. He could call his assistants, but Milena did not know if she would still be here when they arrived. At the same moment, Oscar changed his shoes and said that he had an important meeting, which is why he was about to leave. As soon as he left, the lady called out to the poor fellow, to which he immediately took notice and asked what had happened. After that, the guy and girl ran in a certain direction. The girl led him to where no one would notice them. When they stopped, Milena began to ask the Lord why he even intervened in their conversation. He was lucky that nothing happened to him and that everything went smoothly, but it was still reckless. After a couple of seconds, the Lord said that he really made a mistake in taking this action. Suddenly, the girl said that she was grateful for the help, since she really needed it, but it was too dangerous. After this, the poor fellow became happier, and the girl began to think that he had ears and a tail. Suddenly, she said that it was even quite good that he followed her. Otherwise, everything would have ended in an unknown way. The Lord at that moment asked Milena if he was able to repay her with his action for saving him. At that moment, the girl informed him that they were now completely settled, for which the guy no longer had to worry. The poor man again handed the lady the bills that she had given him, saying that his assumption was correct, and he just needed to return the money. When he was about to leave the girl, she decided that she should not have acted very impulsively. However, this man, reacting to Milena's every word, attracted her entire attention. Suddenly, the lady informed the Lord that she actually needed a bodyguard, which shocked him. At that very second, the girl realized what she had begun to carry, from which she immediately began to try to change the situation. Tears began to well up in the Lord's eyes, after which he asked with a smile whether this meant that he could stay with the girl. After this, Milena realized that with his cuteness, the guy could attract great attention from women. After some time, Oscar sat and thought about what had happened and what he should do now. The thought was spinning in his head about why his ex began to keep some beggar unknown to him near her. He had previously thought that he could feel better as soon as he saw that the girl would begin to cling to him again. The thought began to arise in his head about simply using the powers of the Red Ravens, but before that he needed to increase his own fame. While his thoughts were moving, he called his deputy to him and asked him if their actress was ready. It turned out that she had long been prepared for her task and was waiting for instructions while in the corridor. Oscar immediately thought about how much money and time he had wasted because everything went wrong. At this time, the actress walked into the office, beautifully dressed and ready for the assignment. But Oscar's head was filled with thoughts that he needed to stop worrying about Milena and start his own plans. The girl who came was the star of the Oscar Theater. Tickets for performances with her participation were sold out in advance, but all this was only thanks to the director. However, this time the man noticed that his actress was wearing very much makeup, which made the girl very surprised. He started talking about how she definitely wouldn't have to shine on stage today, but she couldn't be bothered to think about it herself. After these words, the actress immediately began to apologize and also ask for time so that she could put herself in order. Oscar immediately told her to forget about it, since now they didn't have time for anything anyway. The director immediately began to think that since the girl was an actress, such behavior was quite acceptable for her. However, his former actress was the complete opposite of this girl. She had no intention of acting in front of anyone outside of the theater presence. She didn't even agree to do this when very important guests came. The actress stood by her words and said that she was not a doll for the amusement of any people's eyes. She was also a person. Oscar didn't like the fact that the prima donna was trying with all her might to preserve her acting dignity. Katerina Blanche was previously also an actress, being the star of all the posters of the large theater of Cloudwell. She was also recognized as the best of the best due to her outstanding singing, dancing as well as acting. However, the girl was too devoted to her beliefs, which made her completely inconvenient to use in life. That is why it was more profitable for Oscar to make the obedient Nina Ford the face of the theater, as a result of which Katerina gradually left the game. Now Oscar was thinking about how difficult it was to simply dance and sing when needed for an interview. At that moment, the director was informed that the reporters he had invited had already reached him and were ready for the meeting. When the guys went into the office, one of them said that he was ready to come running at dawn since a special invitation had been received. It turned out that the guy also brought a newcomer with him so that he could gradually learn his job. After the acquaintance finished his speech, the boy introduced himself to the director, which made him very surprised since it was too formal. Edvid began to think that the rumors that were circulating about the Oscar were true, and the director was very kind. But at that very second, the guy saw the actress standing in front of him, which immediately made him amazed. Thoughts began to swirl in my head that a ticket to meet Nina could cost a lot of money, but here it happened completely free of charge. At this point, Oscar started talking about how he just wanted to ask someone for a favor. However, both guys who arrived could not understand what the director was talking about, which is why the first one repeated his task. Since he, the director, handed over a box of cookies, Edvid could not understand why tea or another drink was not served then. At this moment, Oscar started talking about the fact that he had recently released a new play, but there were no actors for it. At the beginning of the phrase, the acquaintance immediately understood what was being said and happily agreed to help the director, also clarifying all the nuances. After this, the director began to describe the hero he needed first of all, covertly talking about the Archduke's nephew. The assistant said that it would be quite difficult to find a person who fits the director's needs, since this is very rare. However, the thought immediately came to mind of simply looking for a person through the contact network. Oscar was also ready to thank his friend well for his help, but he was ready to do it for free. After which, the director began to think that for some time he would simply not have to worry about the search. However, the man understood perfectly well that now it was better for him to tie Malena's hands so that she wouldn't do anything strange. As soon as Oscar informed everyone that he was getting a divorce, your guests were shocked, since this announcement was sudden. But he calmly said that she had too terrible a character, which made their divorce not surprising. Edvid could not believe that the man's wife could so easily agree to this, to which Oscar gave a positive answer. He also began to talk about how, while signing the papers, the woman said that she would simply destroy him at any cost. She could also easily spread various rumors about the director since she had nothing to lose. Suddenly, the man leaned over to his friend and said that he had a very personal request. It was necessary to simply ignore everything Malena said after their divorce, since it would most likely be a lie. At this moment, the assistant said that it would not be surprising if she started doing this, since the girl now had nothing. After that, the guys promised that they would under no circumstances react to what Oscar's ex-wife would say. After all, they also had news reporting ethics since false information was not allowed. Oscar thanked Ruben for agreeing to the request, after which he offered to listen to the best actress sing. After some time, when the guys were getting ready to leave, the newcomer decided to ask his mentor about the divorce of the director and Malena. When he started talking about how no one can be sure that a lady will lie, Ruben could not understand the kid's train of thought. But at that moment, the guy told the newcomer that this was precisely the problem of all beginners. They are looking for a hidden meaning in everything. In addition, it was all about corruption, because that is why the director of the theater turned to their company. After that, Ruben asked the intern to open the cookie box, which made him a little surprised. When the newcomer saw its contents, the mentor asked if he understood why everything was exactly like that, and then asked him not to do anything stupid. After such gifts, no one can do anything. And besides, communication and help with the director was quite a beneficial thing. Besides, if it weren't for today, the guys wouldn't even be able to meet Nina Ford as closely as they did today. Hearing these words, Edvid began to think that for any mentor, such bribes are something that goes without saying. He understood perfectly well that such behavior was terribly wrong and unfair. At this time, Malena and her new partner came to the restaurant to order some food for themselves. The girl understood perfectly well that from now on this guy was her subordinate, which is why she needed to keep an eye on him. But watching him, the lady began to understand that he was too familiar with table etiquette, which confused his image even more. The conviction grew stronger in my head that this man was an educated son from a noble family. Suddenly, Malena decided to ask him whether he really didn't even remember his own name. After this question, the Lord thought again, trying with all his might to remember his own name. But because he was again trying to remember something, the guy felt terrible pain, which is why the desire immediately disappeared. At the same moment, Malena suggested that the poor fellow give him a new name, to which he happily agreed. Suddenly, the name Los came to mind, after which she suggested this name to him, for which she received approval. However, the thought was spinning in my head that she wanted to say that he could simply refuse the given name, but it turned out that the guy really liked his new name, which most likely made everything okay. After which Milena began to rejoice that at least someone could sincerely thank her for something. She understood perfectly well that she had never heard someone thank her for something like that before. When the waitress came, the lady asked her to move the plate, which had more meat, not for her, but for the guy. But then the girl realized that Katerina Blanche herself was standing in front of her, which immediately surprised her. Milena could not understand what the former prima of the Bolshoi Theater was doing in such a simple establishment. When the girl left the guy and the girl, Loss asked the lady if she knew the girl. At that moment, Milena began to think that her ex-husband had become completely stupid and simply kicked out such a beautiful actress. Talents like Katerina's were extremely rare, and such an act on the part of the director was bad. A couple of days later, the girl decided to go and ask to print the news in the city newspaper. However, she was refused, since there were absolutely no free speakers in their place, after which they immediately apologized. Loss suggested that all this was the work of her ex-husband, who was wary of something. Milena began to think that it was not in vain that everything was going so smoothly, because there had to be a catch somewhere. Over the past 2 days, the lady has already managed to calmly inherit her uncle's title as previously planned. She also managed to buy everything most important for Loss in his life, which made the guy a little embarrassed. After the girl took out the will after the expiration of the cell, it was decided to hide the guy's sword there, because it attracted a lot of attention. Milena also had to work on estimates for the renovation of Count Baltus's mansion, but there were no big difficulties there. Now, when all the issues regarding the inheritance and divorce had been resolved, the girl could calmly declare to society that she was the new Countess Balthus. But it seems that Oscar specifically took control of the media out of fear that the girl would talk about unnecessary things. Since Los was worried about her all this time, the girl began to understand that he was the only person who needed this lady. Since it turned out that she had no way to inform everyone through the newspaper about her new title, now another plan was needed. However, there was something that still bothered the girl, but this was precisely what could be simply enchanting. Now there were many rumors that the Duke of Cloudwell and Lady Milena had finally divorced. Someone said that they heard the Duke asking for a divorce first, which was not surprising at all. Since the girl had a rather specific character, it was very difficult to cope with her and live calmly. In the end, a joyful event happened. The man and woman both returned to their original places. Oscar understood perfectly well that his reputation had done its job, and now everyone was talking about what was beneficial for him. Now, Milena would not have been able to resist her ex-husband, since she was clearly of a lower status. But there were thoughts in my head that the girl, even before the end of the divorce process, was constantly with some kind of bodyguard. If the girl thought that she could ruin Oscar's life with Serena's mere existence, then she was very mistaken. And the moment her faith in this collapses, her whole life will turn into a complete nightmare. In this case, the best option for Milena would be to simply fall to the very bottom along with her bodyguard. However, today, Oscar could relax and just start enjoying his wonderful life and the banquet. Suddenly, everyone was told that Countess Balthus had arrived at the banquet, which shocked most of the visitors. The Count did not appear in public after his wife and children disappeared, and there were also rumors that his condition had deteriorated extremely. Oscar wondered if he could win him over to his side in order to become even more powerful. At this moment, Lady Milena walked by and wished everyone a good evening. She reported that the new Countess Balthus greeted everyone present in this place. Oscar was shocked that his ex-wife managed to become the new Countess Balthus. He could not understand how this could happen after all. He didn't even know about the lady's inheritance. In the capital, there was a Lugist club, which was the largest in the capital. It focused on the political and economic social trends in their city. It would also not be superfluous to add that this particular club was considered the center of secular society. Earlier, the lady asked the assistant whether he knew the name of the capital's club, in which Count Baltus was a member. She was lucky that the girl was provided with this information almost immediately, which the lady was happy about. She was well aware of the fact that this particular club was the ideal place to make a great debut. However, the lady forgot the fact that her ex-husband was also a member of the same club, which is why this meeting happened. Although Milena did not want to see Oscar anymore, she still wanted to continue living in the capital. I'd have to get used to it. At this moment, they began to ask the girl about what could have happened to Frederick Balthus himself, to which the new countess sadly said that her uncle had died some time ago. At this point, the lady told everyone about her uncle's last 2 wishes, one of which was for her to become a countess. Everyone present began to pray that the count would rest peacefully, even though it was already quite late. Oscar, who was watching everything from above, could not believe that this was the Malena with whom he had recently divorced. At that same moment, he realized that he had simply been tricked into getting what he wanted in secret. But the man understood perfectly well that his ex opposed him only because she did not know about his influence. Now everything fell into place. It became clear why the girl was constantly going somewhere. Oscar didn't react to this in any way, because he simply thought that she was trying to make herself jealous. But it turned out that she then left only to conclude a contract with her uncle. That is why the lady started talking about divorce and about her mistress, also turning everything around so as not to lose a penny. But after the divorce was completed, she ended up with a huge advantage, as she received alimony, as well as her uncle's fortune. At this moment, the count began to be asked whether he even knew about all this, but his head was filled with thoughts of simply not getting a divorce, because then he himself would have a huge advantage. Now all that was left was to think about how to correct this situation and not harm yourself. Only at that moment did the man notice that he had been addressed for several minutes. Suddenly, Oscar told his friend that he knew about the inheritance Malena had received now. He understood that he should not have shown anyone that he had been fooled by some scoundrel. After which, Oscar said that he urgently needed to leave, which made the acquaintance a little surprised. The man said that even though the lady was his ex, he was still obliged to greet her properly. At this time, Malena was talking with all the guests of the banquet, but at that moment Oscar called her over. He immediately realized that the faces of the people clearly suspected him of something, which is why the director was immediately surprised. Suddenly, the man said that he did not dislike his ex-wife at all, which Malena no longer understood. He told the lady that he had simply come to say hello to her, and, at the very least, to communicate a little with each other. Oscar asked his ex if she would go south because, as far as was known, the count had his own orange farm there. But when he learned that the lady was staying in the capital, he could not understand what business she could have left here. He also understood that most likely all the hospitality shown to the lady at the club was only because she aroused curiosity. After a while, people would have lost interest in her anyway, since her character spoke for itself. Oscar asked the girl why she did not answer his question. He began to assume that she had some other news. Malena began to think about how unfortunate this behavior was on the part of her ex, because she has good acting talent. The lady stated that her uncle also had the Sandro Theater, which was located right in the capital. Because of this, the lady was absolutely not going to give up her uncle's zeal for him, which is why she was going to develop this whole business. From that moment on, Malena was going to completely immerse herself in the theatrical sphere. And of course, she was going to give her place a unique feature that would set it apart from the larger Cloudwell Theater. However, she did not know any of the business secrets of the large Cloudwell Theater, since she had never participated in the development of her husband's business. All this was due to the fact that the Duke so highly respected the traditional values of his theater. After that, she said that her ex-husband was really very good for not letting her see him. At this point, people began to whisper that the Oscar gave absolutely no rights to participate in the business. That is why Malena was going to develop her acting business and manage it herself. However, the lady was well aware that at the moment her words could be like a reckless statement. The Metropolitan Theater business was much the same as Cloudwell's Great Theater. The story of how Cloudwell's Grand Theater became so large and well-known was well-known to the public. It all started with the fact that Kieran Cloudwell made Edwina, who suffers from depression, laugh with his performance. The girl went to his performances every day and restored all her health. Her father also enjoyed performances that made his daughter laugh, so he spared no expense on his performances. It was then that the aristocrats followed the ladies to the big theater, and the actors were in dire need of sponsorship. The capital's best screenwriter and talented director also began working together in the theater. It was not surprising that now the girl looked uncompetitive, which made her more nervous. She understood that her idea could have been a failure, but she still tried not to lose her rightness. At this point, Oscar said that his ex-wife was clearly determined to give him a real challenge. He also inquired about whether Count Balthus was the director of his theater troupe. If the lady did not participate in these matters, then it only meant that the girl was not unprofessional. The ex-husband said that the girl definitely shouldn't have made such statements if she didn't even know how to run a business properly. At this moment, Milena began to be well aware that everyone present was on Oscar's side and did not believe in the girl's strength. But then she said that she knew how hard it was to run the theater business, but she was still confident in herself. There is also no way she would have been able to do something like this if she had naively believed that everything would be very simple. Oscar couldn't understand why Milena called the theater business something important. The girl knew that the only way to attract attention to herself would be through words. It could also help to quote some influential person who could change the opinion. Milena was enriched by vivid and indirect experience, thanks to which people saw on stage what penetrated deep into their hearts. And her uncle earlier said that culture and enlightenment in it can easily change the fate of an entire nation. It was thanks to her uncle's words that the lady understood that by using them she could easily achieve her goal. But then Milena asked her ex if he thought that the girl saw this whole situation as easy money. However, in her head she could not understand what kind of facial expression Oscar had. There was an assumption that the man was upset because the girl quoted the words of his own father in order to refute him. But this emotion was more like shame than resentment for something, which was very surprising. However, the lady could not understand why the ex was ashamed of his father, because it would be better for him to be proud of him. At this point, Oscar stated that he perfectly understood the spirit and ambitions of the new Countess Balthus. While the guy and girl were talking to each other, Duke Lopez came down to them. Milena understood that after so much time, she managed to attract attention to herself. But she never expected that this would happen from the president of the club. And told the lady that the girl would have to do a lot of work to achieve her goal, because her theater was not so famous. Although the Duke was clearly on Oscar's side, Milena knew that she should not let her own guard down. After which, the man and the girl began to discuss how best to start their own theater business. Milena said that she had quite a lot of wonderful stories that could become an original play. These stories were definitely unknown to anyone, which is why there was a high probability that the audience would definitely like them. Since the girl did not keep all this a secret, the man could afford to ask whether all this also applied to the actors. Milena wanted to get one of the best actresses, who was kicked out of the Bolshoi Theater, but had not yet signed a contract with her. In any case, Milena was ready to try hard, and soon all people would be able to see her play. She hoped that everyone present here would be able to show great interest in her and provide some kind of support. The director began to say that the girl really surprised him, and there was a possibility that Oscar would soon be disappointed. This dispute and the development of the lady will look like a chance to observe Kieran's new life. After some time, Oscar began to tell his assistant that he should restore the contract with Katerina Blanche as soon as possible. He was informed that they would immediately meet with Blanche and talk about returning to the Bolshoi Theater. However, the man was not at all happy with the timing. He needed the meeting with the girl to take place right now, but not in the morning. It was necessary to tell the actress that a performance would be made especially for her, where Blanche would become the main character. But from the phone I began to hear why the man fired one of the best actresses in the first place. The man thought that without Katerina, nothing would happen to his big theater, and everything would be fine. Even if Katerina was very beautiful, Oscar still had Nina Ford, who could compare with the girl. However, losing Blanche not of her own free will, but by the decision of another theater, was a completely different case. It was also unacceptable for such a talent to be taken away from a man by his rival, because then she would be much higher. At this time, Milena tried to rest, because after the previous day she was squeezed like lemon. The question running through her mind was what she should do next to please everyone as a theater owner. Previously, you just needed to win over the club director, but now it will be quite difficult to gain his favor. Now it was necessary to attract the attention of the public, because she had already announced her debut in front of all people. If a girl gets good reviews from critics, it won't mean anything, which will cause viewers to turn away. At that moment, Loss knocked on the room and wanted to talk to the girl about a matter. However, Milena could not understand how the guy could remain so shy every time he asked permission to pass. The girl was also interested in whether Loss was as shy before he lost his memory. The lady was starting to get the urge to tease Loss a little more, but after he was embarrassed, she would have to stop. Suddenly, the guy announced that he had already offered Katerina a contract in accordance with the conditions that Milena had proposed. But the lady understood perfectly well that Katerina Blanche might not immediately give her answer regarding the return. Although Milena did not tell Los about this, the guy still did an excellent job with his assignment. At that moment, the guy said that he had another piece of news, which made the lady immediately begin to rejoice. It turned out that previously Blanche had also been visited by the deputy director, who came with an offer to return to the big theater. But the girl was not surprised that Oscar guessed who his ex-wife had bet on. If Oscar is trying to bring Katerina back to him urgently, then most likely he offered extremely favorable conditions. Milena knew that it would be very difficult for her to cope with her ex if her excellent plan failed so easily. At that moment, Los told Milena that Katerina wanted to see the Countess in the morning in order to personally discuss everything with her. It seemed that the girl hated her former director terribly, which is why she was going to discuss everything with the lady. In the morning, Milena and Katerina met in the same cafe, after which they were going to start negotiations. At that moment, Blanche asked the Countess if she had read the latest news and if she knew why everything was exactly like that. When she realized that it was about the newspaper, she immediately remembered how rude the reporters were when she visited them. But Katerina began to ask the lady why she was smiling so much, because the information in it was terrible. In the article, they highlighted Milena's statement that she wanted to go into the theater business, but they did so in the worst possible light. At Cloudwell's Grand Theater, Katerina was promised a tribute performance, as well as a return to the stage. The director also promised Blanche that he would give her about 3% of the proceeds from ticket sales if she only returned. The lady understood that this condition could indeed be met, since the big theater monopolized the entire theater market. However, Milena saw from Katerina's face that she was unhappy with the conditions offered to her. It turned out that the actress hated the director because she perfectly understood the true fact of why they wanted her back. Katerina did not consider herself some kind of dog that should come when called only. The actress was a diva who sings for people, but she was only willing to do it on stage. Katerina now wanted only to take revenge and destroy Oscar at all costs. At this moment, the actress asked Countess Balthus for help in order to deal with their main obstacle. Katerina hoped that the lady would be able to make sure that the actress could walk across Oscar's face. She asked if Milena could make Oscar regret looking down on her. The lady agreed to help Katerina, but on the condition that she would also help her make it happen. If the actress had been on the Countess's side, then they would definitely have succeeded, even if with difficulty. Suddenly, Milena asked her bodyguard to call a carriage, since now she had to go somewhere. However, she immediately understood that Los clearly wanted to say something, but for some reason he simply remained silent. At that moment, Milena asked him what he wanted to tell her, and also whether he was afraid of something. After some time, Milena suggested that Los simply saw Oscar at the moment when she was talking to Katerina. But when she received a negative answer, she decided to continue to find out what happened. The assumption fell on a bad mood. That wasn't the point either. It also had nothing to do with the fact that the guy didn't like Katerina Blanche. But after she heard that this was not the case, she was immediately happy, because the girl was the best actress. However, even in this case, it still seemed that Los simply did not like the actress, which he completely denied. It turned out that the guy was worried that he would no longer be able to be the most useful since Katerina appeared. At that moment, Milena did not understand what Los meant, but when she asked again, he simply left. Suddenly, the lady realized that the guy was really upset only because he could not be as useful as an actress. But the Oscar was useful in a completely different area, just as the actress was useful in a completely separate one. At this time, Los was talking to himself about whether he could even be more useful than Katerina Blanche. Milena understood that most of her bodyguard's actions were incredibly sweet and charming. However, she could not understand what she now needed to do with this person to make everyone feel comfortable. At that moment, the lady received a call. It turned out that it was the butler Dylan who was going to give new information. The butler contacted her because he had to report that the renovation of her mansion was finally coming to an end. From today, the lady could give up her hotel stay and move to her new home. She asked the butler to call a carriage to the hotel in the late afternoon so that she could reach the mansion safely. Now Milena has finally become a real countess. Her last few days have passed very quickly. But also during all this time, she realized that her life in the hotel was quite good. One could say that it was even excellent. At that moment, the girl received a call again, after which she calmly decided to communicate with this person. Milena decided to announce that she and her bodyguard would be returning back to their mansion tonight. It turned out that the call was made only because the lady thought that the guy would be happy about their news. Loss could not even think that his savior could consider him a dear person. Suddenly, the lady noticed that her bodyguard's mood suddenly improved. Now all that was required of Loss was to pack his things, because very soon they would be leaving. She understood perfectly well that Loss was a young master who had lost his memory. The lady understood that if he regained his memories, he would not be able to stay next to her, but she had to hide all these experiences. After a while, Milena asked her bodyguard if he had forgotten anything in his hotel room. When the guy said that he had taken all his things, the lady said that their carriage was already there, and all that was left was to get there. The girl also realized that Loss was now clearly in a better mood than he had been before. But now he was again like a shy puppy who just wanted to be teased in order to confuse him even more. However, she only took Loss with her as a bodyguard, leaving him to simply watch and protect her. And perhaps it will be very difficult for him to cope with this task due to the fact that he is embarrassed every time he sees a lady. Suddenly, Milena wondered if she had gone too far with her joke, hoping that she had not offended Loss in any way. However, at that moment, the bodyguard covered his mouth with his hand and muttered that he would try to be more attentive. Milena immediately told the guy that it was just a joke, so you shouldn't worry about it too much. But even because it was a joke, the bodyguard realized that he needed to be more careful anyway. Milena realized that at the moment Loss had pulled himself together and was now calmer. A couple of minutes later, the girl was met by a coachman who said that he would accompany them all the way. Loss extended his hand to his mistress and said that he would help her get inside the transport, since it was quite tall. Milena suggested that the bodyguard began to behave this way only because of her recent joke. When the guy and girl arrived at their new home, the lady was delighted with the mansion she saw. Milena could not believe that this mansion was really her home, since now it was completely different. The butler reported that the garden was still under construction, which is why it was not as luxurious as the rest of the property. But when the lady said that he was luxurious, the man began to say that this was not enough. Milena was also shown her new servants, who will serve only her and those she tells. At that moment, they all greeted their new countess and wonderful hostess with a smile on their faces. However, the lady could not accept the fact that she was treated normally, because before she had only been ignored. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that now all these people would be loyal only to their new mistress. But now she was going to do it, so that not a single person regrets that he came to her. He also needed to take care of his affairs here. As everyone walked inside, Milena began to realize that she now had a huge responsibility. The thought came to mind that Loss would soon regain his memories and leave her in any case. However, the lady had a feeling that Loss had become a very close person to her, which only made her sadder. After some time, the lady asked the bodyguard to wait for her for a while as she needed to discuss something with Dylan. The guy understood perfectly well that this was a personal and serious matter, but he still had the feeling that he had simply been abandoned. The last time Milena tried to persuade Katerina to return to her theater, Loss felt almost the same. In the morning, he unconsciously started talking about it, succumbing to an impulse of feelings, but now it seemed to him that this was too childish an act. He could not imagine what the lady might think if only she understood what he truly felt. However, most likely the girl would say that the reason for this could only be memory loss, and because of this, he was so dependent on her. No matter how much the guy thought about it, she was the only one with whom Loss felt safe. The flow of all thoughts was interrupted by the sound of footsteps, which is why I had to return back to the world. He realized that only trained people could have such heavy steps, but Loss could not understand why they were there. The physique and shape of the people who came indicated that this was definitely a new guard. The guy understood that if new security appeared, then most likely the girl no longer needed a bodyguard. Unlike Katerina and the butler, if the guards crossed paths with Loss, then perhaps one of them could become Milena's escort. In that case, the guy could simply cease to be needed at all, which made everything sadder. The position of the guards and the time of their change of posts were already determined and indicated in their instructions. The commander understood that the salary did not correspond to the work performed, which made it seem that the rumors about the Countess were exaggerated. However, on the other hand, it was good that at the moment, the management was pampering their workers with a decent salary. I also couldn't wrap my head around how much personal security could be paid, even if ordinary ones were paid such sums. The man noticed that another person from the security was walking and was in no hurry, even though he was late. It is because of him that now we will have to explain everything that was said earlier, so that this time everyone is notified. But then he immediately realized that the guy who came was definitely not from his mercenary corps, although it seemed completely different. The head immediately realized that most likely the person who came was the personal bodyguard of their new mistress. He was quite tall and also very slender. He had snow-white skin, which indicated that he was definitely not a commoner. When the man introduced himself, Los realized that he belonged to a group of mercenaries specializing in protection and security. The guys were quite noble, which is why they often received orders to accompany aristocrats, but they all went only for the money. The bodyguard could not allow these people to guard her mistress, but now she must not let the situation become clear. At this moment, people began to laugh a little. They could not believe that they would be on the same team with this person. The captain told his subordinates to get together and stop chatting for no reason, because it was unnecessary. After which the man asked the guy's name and asked if he wanted to join their troops. No one could believe that this man could be a bodyguard and protect the countess with such a fragile-looking body. Los understood perfectly well that although Milena hired these people, it was better for him to show his place in the hierarchy. At that moment, the butler approached them and indignantly asked what kind of noise was being made here. But Dylan knew that he hired this group because he knew that he had impeccable experience and reputation, but they all showed their true side at once. Suddenly, the question arose about who of those present here was the weakest in his opinion. But since no one answered Los, he asked his question again, but specifically to the captain. Suddenly, the guys started pushing one red-haired guy named Billy. They told him that it was time to make room for the new guy. Billy began to talk about the fact that he could remain on the team, since his contract had not yet expired. At the same moment, Los put the red-haired guy down, which is why he was immediately surprised, since he did not understand what had happened at all. The bodyguard immediately demanded the next challenger, who wanted to match his strength. Milena could not understand what was happening, because this behavior was not similar to the behavior of Los, whom she knew. She also couldn't understand what had happened here earlier to make the bodyguard so angry. The lady knew that fighting would not solve anything in this situation, but she also could not allow them to treat Los like that. However, the bodyguard shouldn't be touched. Now one could also immediately understand the level of the guy and the security. A couple of minutes later, Los told the commander-in-chief that it was now the next person's turn, but he was in severe shock. Since it was his turn, the man immediately began to apologize for not immediately recognizing the guy's abilities. The butler immediately apologized to the lady for choosing such poor security. He was going to immediately fire these guards and hire completely new ones, which would be much better. But then the lady began to stop the butler, as she was going to think about all his words. Milena understood perfectly well that these mercenaries had been carefully selected for quite a long time by Dylan himself. Suddenly she announced that she needed local mercenaries in any case, why it was possible to leave these too. She also told Los that his result was simply amazing, after which she said that she did not regret choosing him one bit. The lady also told the commander that it was now obvious that of all of them, he had the advantage in combat skill. The man stated that the girl was indeed right in her words. They were all much weaker. Now the command of the guards was completely entrusted and transferred to the most powerful man among them, Los. It could be assumed that from now on the bodyguard's orders were also Milena's orders, which they were obliged to obey. And the world of mercenaries, first of all, was skills and strength, which they did not have so much of, and there should be no complaints about it. However, it was these mercenaries who were said to be the strongest and bravest, which in their opinion was true. Milena began to say that this rumor was not entirely true, which has now been confirmed, because now the boys were defeated by the weak boy in less than 5 minutes. When she started talking about cutting the salary in half, the man began to appear, from which Milena suggested simply firing them. And the rumor that the best mercenaries in the capital were defeated by a simple boy would clearly have a very bad effect on their reputation. The girl also thought about whether she should have kept such things quiet, because she knew that everyone would be interested in knowing the truth. Suddenly, the lady asked Los if there were those who had previously offended him in some way, and whether he wanted to see them now. If the guy was unpleasant, then he could simply tell her about it and she could fire them, since she needed to be more attentive to the guy's opinion. At this point, Los stated that there was no need to do this, since he just wanted to command them all. He said that his place was behind the mistress in the role of protector. He was not going to give this to anyone. The bodyguard was finally glad that he was able to convey his most important idea to the lady. Milena said that she was grateful to him for protecting her and helping her in every possible way, even with cutting expenses. And for these mercenaries, ordinary fists were enough for them to simply lose. At this time, Oscar finally visited his mistress, who had been waiting for him for a very long time. But the man told her not to talk nonsense, because he had already said earlier that he needed some time to settle the problems. The lady understood this perfectly well, but she still wanted her beloved to be with her at her housewarming party. Serena was also already used to her lover being irritated, but today it was too much. Now the girl felt that she was the main irritant this time, which made her feel uneasy. I couldn't wrap my head around why the Count could choose just one slave, and not a lady of his level. It began to seem as if Serena was some special girl who could so easily get Oscar's love. In addition, he recently divorced his wife. It seemed that this happened precisely because of his mistress. Now, it could be that the Duke will be able to care for his girlfriend much more than he could before, but the girl could not understand why today her lover was simply silent and did not enjoy the affection. At that moment, she noticed his facial expression. It was completely indifferent and frightening. Oscar at that moment simply left his mistress with the thought that even in her presence he could not stop thinking about his ex's trick. Thoughts about her continued to bother the man to such an extent that he even forgot about Selena's existence. He could not understand why it was his ex who constantly haunted his head. This could only be because the lady knew very well all his weaknesses, which is why she put pressure on him. His weakness was precisely his mistress. If something happened to her, then the weakness would disappear. However, it could also be too hasty a decision, because things could have turned out completely differently. That is why, if he had to get rid of his mistress, he should have done it later. Oscar was sure that Milena was definitely confused by the man's behavior. Only he knew how stupid the girl was, because she decided to start a business in the same field just to provoke her ex. Oscar thought about how much the lady could regret what had happened, because she could go crazy from being separated from him. Then, when he is personally convinced of this, perhaps after this the man will leave all these nauseating thoughts. When he arrived at the lady's gate, she immediately met him as she was returning home. Oscar greeted his ex-girlfriend, to which she simply asked him not to block her path. At this moment, the man was shocked, as the lady reacted to him as usual even when he personally came to her. But then the lady said that she was going to focus only on her business and not pay attention to any interference. Oscar realized that the girl was currently talking about her play just to take a break from everything. It could also be bragging. Suddenly, the man decided to offer his ex-wife certain conditions and also become employees. As the owner of a large theater, the man knew much more about business, after which he was ready to help the lady. If Milena wanted to succeed in the theater business, then she should have stayed close to Oscar. When the man extended his hand to his ex, she decided to answer him, saying that his cooperation was a rather unexpected statement. But the Countess told Oscar that she was forced to refuse because she wanted to cope with everything herself. That is why the lady asked that the man just stop sticking to her so much. When Oscar heard this, he became furious since he had not even tried to do so. At this point, the lady asked him if he was nervous because she knew her deepest secret. Los also listened to this entire conversation, but he didn't even know how to respond to all this. Why he simply remained silent. After this, Milena told her ex that this person would not say a word of what he heard to anyone. In addition, be that as it may, all the investments had already been made, which is why it was no longer possible to change anything. At that moment, Oscar realized that Milena was talking about paid alimony, since she had already succeeded in this. After which she asked her ex to step aside and not block her entire path, which he was doing now. As soon as he moved out of the way, the lady and her bodyguard simply walked by, no longer noticing their ex. But then Milena said that she hoped that the next time she met him, they would simply greet each other and go their separate ways. After this, Oscar began to hope that soon the lady's entire business would go bankrupt, and she would stop behaving like this. It was after this that Milena would begin to kiss his shoes and beg for forgiveness and the return of their marriage. He understood that at the moment the lady's play only had one main character and did not even have a complete plan. It didn't matter that she was able to take Katerina for herself. The scene could not be created by just one actor, since there had to be a plot itself. If a girl does not have a good and interesting script, then she will never be able to succeed in the theater. Because Milena refused Oscar at a time when he was personally ready to provide her with some service, he wanted to make the lady suffer. The man returned to his place. he realized that his place of work still looked like a machine factory. Jacob could only come up with the play, and his other students wrote everything for him. But in any case, Oscar didn't care about this, because the main thing was just to get the script on time. At that moment, the man was met by a person he knew, and he began asking the director about what brought him to this place. He immediately began to apologize for the fact that this place was very miserable, and also for the fact that there were a lot of people here. However, Oscar said that he did not intend to stay long in this place, since he had come simply to give away a contract that should have simply been signed. Suddenly, an acquaintance said that he was always happy to cooperate with the large Cloudwell Theater because it was quite profitable. Since the contract brought in would be quite expensive, Oscar decided to cut all unnecessary labor. There were more untalented and old actors in the theater than he had previously thought about at all. He also never expected that he had so much garbage that it simply began to waste his budget. Worthy actors had already received their new contract to sign, leaving the friend now to focus on creating a script. Suddenly, Oscar saw that one student began to pack her things somewhere, which made him decide to ask why she was doing this. It turned out that this particular girl decided to quit, since most of the students quickly leave this job. Lately, there have been so many people who think too much of themselves, which is quite upsetting. And people themselves couldn't cope with all this crazy workload for pennies, and they also had to listen to a lot of nasty things about themselves. The girl who left wanted only for the man's entire business to simply go bankrupt and go to the bottom. As it turned out, she was heading to the estate of Countess Balthus, for which she had already called a carriage. It was the Countess who called her to her, also saying that she was going to pay for the journey upon arrival. When the lady had already arrived at the Countess, she greeted her warmly and said that she needed to talk about something. This girl's name was Becky, and she was very pleased to receive a personal invitation from Countess Balthus herself. Milena asked Becky to drop all these formalities. The girl was invited because the lady liked her work. When Becky couldn't believe that after so much time, she finally heard praise. Milena asked if the girl said goodbye to Hennessy, because if this was the case, then he could soon regret it. Becky understood that this would not happen, because the man did not even remember the name of this girl. Moreover, when she left, something very funny and rather strange happened in front of her ear. Oscar, who had never even shown his nose in the studio before, abruptly came to the studio. As it turned out, he was talking about extending his contract. Suddenly, the lady began to think that this action on Oscar's part was quite expected and understandable. Most likely, the man was worried that she could lure away the talents of people whom he did not want to lose. However, even despite this, Milena did not need all of them at all because it was important for her to find a good team. After this, both girls decided to discuss the terms of Milena's contract because the Countess seemed to think that Becky did not like them. But in reality, everything was completely different. Becky could not even think that she would ever be offered such a heavenly job. Milena could not understand why the girl was so touched, but immediately assumed that it was because of all the hard lives of these people. Regardless, Milena was going to treat the employees much better than Oscar treated them. At that moment, Becky said that she was ready to do everything in her power because the rumors about the lady turned out to be untrue. She understood that it is better to be an evil woman in the eyes of others than to be unhappy with her ex. Becky also reported that she had done everything that Lady Milena had previously asked and was ready to stretch it out. At this moment, the lady was surprised that she had outlined the summary of her play only 3 days ago and received the finished result. But then she was immediately happy because the worker had excellent speed as well as good quality of work, which was needed by the theater. Although first, in any case, it was necessary to read the draft written during this time and then continue to make amendments. When she started reading it, she immediately realized that the text and story were not only interesting, but also attention-grabbing. Miss Dantel had a huge talent for writing plays, which is why she was chosen for the theater. When the girl started talking about the main character, Milena still did not understand what she was saying about him. Be that as it may, the lady could not understand why Becky chose such a story for the main character. Instead of being a prince on a white horse, the hero was portrayed in a ridiculous way. And also everything was completely different from Cloudwell's theater. It had to be a play in which the main characters were children, since she had never seen anything like this before. The idea was to use Pinocchio's work as a basis since the copyright had already expired, and besides, no one would have recognized the name initially. This was supposed to be a story about a wooden doll that had previously been bewitched. Now its nose grew when lied to. Now Milena was confident that she could show her ex that he should not have behaved so arrogantly. The Adventure of Pinocchio was written by Carlo Collodi back in the late 19th century. In her past life, when the lady staged plays in theaters for children, she took this particular production every time. Thanks to the frequent repetitions of this tale, the girl remembered all the important scenes and lines by heart. Since the work eventually gained adaptations in other countries, there was confidence that this play would gain popularity here too. Suddenly, Becky asked Milena whether Katerina Blanche would really be the main character of this play. It turned out that this was indeed the case, and last night the lady had already handed over a rough script to the actress. However, this play was for children, which was completely different from Oscar's productions. Becky admitted that these productions in theaters were something unusual and new, but there were doubts about whether it would be successful. Milena continued to stand her ground and say that everything would work out for them, although she perfectly understood the reason for the concern. In this world, children who were under 14 years old were simply not allowed into the theater. But there was also something that Milena learned about during market research. The big theater created plays specifically for children and nothing more. Other teams were busy copying Cloudwell's large theater concept, from which the specifics grew. However, among all this, there was still no decent theater where small children could go. Children were not allowed to see plays only because they wanted to preserve the prestige of their theater. Although the past Duke did not strictly follow this prohibition, the only place for them was the game room. After Oscar took the whole business into his own hands, even these rooms disappeared. They were replaced by additional rooms. In other words, it could be said that in this world, business aimed at children was a goldmine. It seemed that Kieran and Oscar both considered the children's business to be completely unprofitable. The ex-husband would clearly be taken by surprise because he certainly could not imagine the beginning of children's plays, especially from Milena. However, the girl was confident that she could handle the business related to children much better than anyone else. This was an area in which Oscar knew absolutely nothing, unlike the girl, who had a ton of experience. At this point, Milena asked Becky if anything about the play and its idea bothered her. However, she was concerned that the main character had to be a child, and besides Katerina, there were no other actors. As strange as it may be, thanks to Becky's script and Katerina's performance, no one could fail. Although Miss Blanche had never been in a role like this before, she was a natural actress. The lady was sure that Katerina would definitely cope with such a role, although she was not sure about it. She felt that she could only play the role of a character who wins the hearts of the audience through singing and dancing. Katerina understood that she was unlikely to be able to play the role of a wooden doll, which is why she could never take such a role. But Milena still couldn't understand why Katerina so strongly refused to play this role. It turned out that the lady had never played something like this before, and besides, she had never even thought about something like this. She had no experience in this kind of game, even when she played for the Duke of Cloudwell, which only made the situation worse. The Cloudwell Theatre did not stage anything like this. If the audience wanted to look at the beautiful appearance of the characters, they would certainly go only to him. But this was absolutely not what Katerina and Milena themselves wanted. They had no desire to chase beautiful appearance. The girls wanted to make a strong and unconventional impression that the audience would never forget. The audience will be shocked by Miss Blanche's new attempt to return to the stage and start her game all over again. They were supposed to enjoy the play and the game itself without prejudice. These were the impressions that were to be created. Because the audience has changed, Katerina must also look completely different on stage than she did before. And if the whole point was only the fear of losing one's reputation, then there was a way to play this role and not lose one's face. You just had to be confident in your game and try to give it your all, even if you had to embarrass yourself a little. If the actress did this, then she would achieve exceptional success. This is how she would be able to crush those who laughed at her. Miss Blanche could simply hesitate on stage and become embarrassed, and that is when she would become funny. It was necessary to show people that Katerina was a real and talented actress. She deserved to shine on stage. Milena believed that Miss Blanche was the one who was worthy of being with her. However, if Katerina still thought that she could not cope with this role, she could quit without any problems. In 3 days, the lady was going to hold auditions to choose supporting actors. At this time, the Duke inquired from his confidant about whether the great Cloudwell Theatre had indeed undergone restructuring. When he realized that this was true, the man realized that Oscar was very different from his brother, even though they were of the same blood. However, he still understood the importance of profit and efficiency when running a business. But even with that in mind, it was hard to understand why he would cut down so much of the people in the theater just to take care of the main characters. Although his plays were still magnificent, the man felt sorry for the people he threw away. It turned out that even Anthony Brogo was also cut, which was extremely strange because he was great. The Duke began to ask everyone more about this because it was completely impossible for him to understand that Oscar could really kick him out. The man could believe what the director was thinking when he fired the very first public figure who was supported by the entire family. He knew very well how much this Duke's father cared about Anthony Brogo's work and how much effort he put into him. This man, even after Kieran's death, was the main and most outstanding actor of the large theater of Cloudwell. Oscar could not show the most ordinary respect for such an important actor for his theater. However, the fact was that Anthony no longer met all the requirements of the big theater, which is why he was fired. At Cloudwell Grand Theater, there is one unspoken rule. All actors must maintain their impeccable appearance. For the same reason, actors must retire from the stage upon reaching a certain age. They say that what does not shine on its own is not worth standing under spectacular lighting. Cloudwell Grand Theater always demonstrates the indescribable beauty of an ideal world. This is why viewers love him, but the reality is incredibly cruel. With a look of despair, the man reflected that the problem of the actor's age was not the whole problem. He decided to take a walk under the night sky to think it over again. Walking in the dark night, he continued to think that despite the fact that he and Anthony have different statuses, they are quite close, but he did not know how to console him. Taking a good drag from his pipe, something suddenly dawned on him, and he looked ahead in surprise. On the wall, he saw an advertisement from the Baltus Theater about a set of actors, and since she began to act. Apparently, the girl had already decided to present some kind of play. Continuing to read the ad, the man thought that apparently her statement was clearly not empty words. Again, something surprised him about this announcement. At the very bottom of the advertisement, it was written that the age and gender of the actors do not matter, and you can apply directly at the theater. 3 days later, Milena and Becky were sitting in the theater hall. Becky seemed very tortured, apparently from the number of applications lying on the table. The tension increased, and Becky began to shout that there were only 10 minutes left before the audition began, and apparently Miss Blanche would not come. There were many other candidates who came to the audition who seemed good, but for the main role, it was as if not. What if Miss Blanche never showed up? To all these experiences, Milena said her firm no. She was sure that Miss Blanche would definitely come. Looking at the wall clock, she suggested waiting a little longer as she saw the passion in her eyes. And a moment later, the late Miss Blanche burst through the door. Without hesitation, Milena decided to stand out with sarcasm, telling Miss that she came a little late. The sarcasm took Miss by surprise, and she immediately apologized for her tardiness and delay. She then continued that she was late because she was watching the boys in the alley. An hour before the audition, Miss Blanche stood in the room and looked in the mirror. Her thoughts were clouded by the fact that if she didn't go, it would mean she was fired. The praise and cheers she received on stage were still fresh in her mind. This was contrary to the fact that she needed to take on the role of a funny wooden doll. Yes, she would even be glad, but if this character were not so ridiculous. Looking in the mirror, she literally scolded herself, saying that Katarina, you really wanted to return to the stage. And she clearly wanted to return in a new role rather than as an absurd hero. Suddenly, she began to reproach herself for the fact that for some time, she began to believe that only beautiful things should be on stage. And the reason for these thoughts was quite understandable. She had always heard about it in the large theater of Cloudwell. She was crazy for starting to think at some point that this could be natural. Everything on stage had to be beautiful. The idea of Oscar Cloudwell, planted in her head by that son of a bitch, took possession of her. Just because there are similar rules in the big theater of Cloudwell does not mean that it is right, only why she forgot about it. The main thing of an actor is to give people joy, even if it was the ridiculous role of a wooden boy. Miss began to understand that the main thing is not beauty at all, but the pleasure of the viewer. And as a wonderful actor, she will definitely cope with any role and achieve the praise and joy of every viewer. When Miss Blanche entered the hall to the girls, she said that she should see the actors who would work with her to make sure of their excellent skills, to which the girls immediately agreed, because Miss had the main role. And now, finally, the entire jury is assembled and ready to listen. Milena invited the #1 actor to come on stage. The first candidate turned out to be not a very good option. The guy was sweating heavily from stress and at the same time stuttered and faltered in his speech. The heat of anger emanated from the girls. They clearly expected a completely different result. It seemed to them that the guy had come to mock them because he gave out 3 combos at once: unstable breathing, stuttering, and cherry, a weak voice. Holding her head in her hands from what she saw, Milena began to argue that she sees several people who have the makings, but she needs to choose one. Although there are other characters in this play besides Pinocchio, it is necessary to develop their talents, even if they only appear on stage for a while. There are roles that cannot be handled with little talent. For example, Geppetto is the woodcarver, creator and father of Pinocchio. Although he does not play a large role in the play, he is a key figure in the climax. This is precisely the scene of the reunion of Pinocchio and Geppetto. Tired and exhausted, Geppetto survives a shipwreck after an encounter with a shark. When Pinocchio saw his father like this, he sincerely repented of his misdeeds, and so he turns from a bad doll into a good child. We need an actor who can play this scene and will keep the bar at Katarina's level so as not to get lost against her background. Realizing that at the very first performance, Milena could not show that her theater was inferior to Cloudwell's, she asked Katarina if she saw a suitable partner among the candidates. Miss Blanche began talking enthusiastically about candidate number 23. Frowning deeply, Milena began to reason that with such actors, the audience would not be able to have fun, and maybe she should compromise with herself and give up the idea of a perfect performance. They decided to stop and take a break for 15 minutes. Going out into the street, Milena continued to torment herself with questions. Should she take part in the play as a director and actor? But since this is the first performance, she should focus on one thing. A moment later, her thoughts were interrupted by a picture of a standing man and a little girl. This little beauty was holding a piece of paper in front of her and was talking about how the man was asked to come here. It turned out to be a granddaughter and grandfather. The girl very much tried to persuade her grandfather to try at least once, but he claimed that he was already too old to play on stage. Lydia, that was the name of this girl, noticed that age in this theater does not matter. Milena realized that her granddaughter was persuading her grandfather to audition for the theater, just as she had announced. The man was very embarrassed. He continued to resist. It was heard that he assumed that there would be no roles for actors his age. He, like Katarina, due to Oscar's obsessive thoughts, believed that only beautiful things should be on stage. Milena politely apologized and carefully asked if they had any business at her theater. The man was a little shocked, but Lydia was incredibly happy that it was the owner of the theater who came up at such a moment of persuasion. Lydia was not embarrassed at all, and, pulling her grandfather's hand, she introduced him to Milena. Her grandfather was a famous actor, Anthony Brogo. The man was very embarrassed by such praise from his granddaughter and said that there was nothing wrong with it and that he was just an old man. Hearing how the man made excuses, Milena immediately realized that he had very good diction and a well-trained voice. Lydia began to scream as if she wanted to say something important, but the man abruptly stopped her. Waving her hand up, Milena asked if he had seen the terms of participation indicated in the advertisement. All that mattered to her was her acting skills. Age didn't matter, absolutely. Milena said that she just needed an actor to play the role of the old man, and considering that he once played in the theater, it would be easier to work with him and teach him if necessary. Approaching the entrance, she invited them to follow her since the second audition was about to begin. Unlike her grandfather, Lydia was in seventh heaven as she followed Milena to the theater. Entering the hall and approaching the table with applications, the girl informed Miss Blanche and Becky that this was the last application. Becky was confused by the candidate and decided to ask if the man would be okay since he looked too tired. Milena was sure that the last candidate was the grandfather, who came with his granddaughter. Despite the fact that he is already old, now this man looks like he is already very, very many years old. Suddenly, Milena's face changed. Complete shock was visible in her eyes. She looked into the eyes of that grandfather, and for some reason she was very shocked. When she met him on the street, he seemed to have lost confidence in himself, but was clearly in a positive mood. Was it really that bad? And she didn't notice his condition. Moreover, his eyes are so lifeless, as if he has lost the will to live. He looked so bad that it seemed as if he had been starving for several days in a row. This is exactly what Scene D needs. An old man in distress in an encounter with a shark is reunited with his son, from whom he was separated a long time ago. The man played this role incredibly, as if he was born for it. His facial expression shows emotions of excitement and joy. This is a good interpretation. They couldn't believe he played so beautifully, and he didn't miss any of the important emotions. He played as if he had a partner on stage, even though Anthony was alone. Milena was filled with happiness at how perfectly he played this role, and why such an amazing and talented actor had doubts about applying. Katerina was shocked that Anthony came and how this could happen. At this time, Milena did not understand what she was talking about. Miss Blanche responded by saying that she knew a man who had just played an amazing role. He was at the Cloudwell Theater. She knew him only by face, but she saw him play for the first time. Having looked through the application, Milena saw that Anthony's previous place of work was indicated, the Cloudwell Theater. At that moment, Katerina admired how talented he was. Miss Blanche said that everyone was not very friendly towards him, and thought that he was just sitting in his place and receiving a salary for no reason, which Milena was surprised by asking if this meant that he did not receive a single role. Katerina said upsetly that in that theater there had never been big roles for older people. Cloudwell creates a fantasy world on stage that is different from reality. Now it's clear why Anthony was talking about beautiful things on the street. The girls consulted and unanimously approved Anthony for the role of Geppetto, and Katerina couldn't wait to rehearse with him. Thus came the first day of rehearsals since the announcement of the audition. Walking down the street, the Countess hurried Los, since the rehearsal would begin very soon. While going down the steps, an ugly conversation could be heard from somewhere. The two ladies at the table kept gossiping that if the Countess had not boasted about creating a troupe, no one would have known about it. And, in general, it was a failure, so they thought. For a second, the girl wondered if this sounded too straightforward, although she believed that it was true. Looking at the girls, the Countess recognized these ladies as they often visited the Duchy of Cloudwell. The lady continued to sarcastically say that since Milena had Miss Blanche, she must now think that she can do whatever she wants. The girl continued to mock that in the end, Katerina would have to be on the same page with such a trash as the Countess. The Countess was only thinking about whether the girl was talking so loudly about all this on purpose, and whether Oscar was involved in this. Do they really think that she will act like a villain in front of people? What people were doing was discussing what a villain she was, and also with the theater business. The Countess came closer to the lady, and she pretended that it was a coincidence to meet Countess Balthus. She has no choice but to deal with this pathetic provocation coming closer. The Countess said that she was glad to meet her. The girls were in complete shock why this villainess became so calm, to which the Countess again responded with a sweet smile, because they had just talked about her theatrical activities and how lucky it was that she just wanted to know their opinion, and in addition asked to tell her what they thought about it. Oh, this sarcasm. The lady froze in complete stupor from what she heard. Since the lady had no words, the Countess decided to clarify whether she had just been slandering her. The girls pretended that there was nothing of the sort, and asked if the Countess was too sensitive, given that she was going to run a theater business. Indeed, the Countess thought this is difficult, and even more difficult if these young ladies create unnecessary problems for themselves. Do you really think that business could have problems? The Countess asked. Yes, the lady again could not utter a word. Milena doesn't mind at all if something bad is said about her theater, but the Duke of Cloudwell would be very angry if he heard something like that. The girl, dumbfounded, asked why the Duke should be angry, to which the Countess reported that the Duke of Cloudwell came to her and asked for her cooperation. She thought it was something important because the Duke personally came to her without even notifying her, and that's when he made her an offer of cooperation. Having added, the Countess asked the lady whether she understood that the Duke was paying special attention to her theater. And if they allow themselves to denigrate her, then they denigrate the honor of the Duke himself. But the Countess, of course, believes that everything will work out great for her, and thereby refuses to cooperate. Los immediately leaned towards the Countess and reminded her that the rehearsal in the theater would begin soon, and it was time for them to go. Looking into his eyes, she didn't even notice how quickly time flew by. Since it was time for them to go, the Countess wished the two ladies a good day and left them to wonder alone. Perhaps these ladies might not believe what she said, but even so, rumors spread quickly, and they definitely won't be the kind of rumors Oscar expected. Approaching the theater, the Countess was thinking about everything. She thought about how ridiculous it was that she had to be late because of a run-in with those ladies. Approaching the front door, she asked Los to give way to her so that she could open the door herself. As she walked in, she thought that her theater was competing with the Cloudwell Theater, and if anyone allowed themselves to be lazy and idle, she would have to intervene. The Countess saw that Miss Blanche and Anthony had gathered and had even begun a rehearsal. The Countess was amazed by the voice she heard. For some reason, Anthony was rehearsing the role of the Blue Fairy. Although he has the voice of an elderly man, reading the fairy's lines does not cause any feeling of imbalance. Perfect breathing, timbre, intonation, and lack of tightness. But why does Geppetto play the role of the Blue Fairy? Suddenly, the remarks began to say that it was necessary to hold a funeral because the wooden doll was dying, which plunged the Countess into shock even more. She did not understand what kind of funeral it was and what was happening. 2 veteran actors demonstrate their performance in a small episode. This is the first script reading, but they fit together perfectly, as if they had been training together for weeks. Incredibly, they learned all 90 minutes of lines. They are truly true professionals in their field. And most of all, Anthony Brogo surprises. But Katerina Blanche, she looks perfect without makeup, like a real little boy. Even her speech and gestures are like that of a real teenager. The Countess could not believe that Katerina had created the image of her character for herself so quickly. How could Oscar miss such a wonderful actor like her? Everyone suddenly came to their senses when they saw the Countess and began to exclaim, "Director," to which the Countess smiled sweetly and said that everything was fine. Coming closer to Miss Blanche, the Countess began to praise her that it was amazing, and she would be able to fit into the character's image in such a short time. Katerina exceeded all her expectations, which made her very moved by what was said. And yet she ran up and hugged Anthony, saying that it was too early for him to leave the stage. All the people at the rehearsal shouted with joy, except for Los. He stood somewhat sad, and the Countess reminded him that the rehearsal needed to be continued. Some time passed, and in general we can finish for today. The Countess was so worried, but everything went much easier than she expected. The Countess invited Los to go and rest, but for some reason he began to apologize to her. He then suddenly picked her up in his arms and lifted her into the air. What an attentive young man! He noticed that the Countess had rubbed her fragile legs, and therefore decided to lift her from the ground. The Countess immediately asked how he noticed this, to which Los replied that he always looks at her. And what will happen next? We look forward to new chapters, my dear viewers.